In a small village nestled in the arid plains of northern Nigeria, there lived a young woman named Aminatu. Her beauty was legendary. Her skin glowed like polished amber under the sun, and her eyes shimmered with an intensity that seemed almost otherworldly. Men from neighboring villages would travel for miles just to catch a glimpse of her, and women often whispered enviously about how effortlessly she commanded attention. Yet, despite her outward charm, Aminatu's life was veiled in shadow. No man who had ever pursued her stayed in her life for long. Some vanished without a trace, leaving behind unanswered questions. Others returned to the village months later, their spirits broken, their faces gaunt, as if they had endured unimaginable suffering. Those who tried to speak of what happened spoke only in fragments, cryptic phrases about dark forces or unseen hands. The villagers grew wary of Aminatu. They admired her beauty from afar, but feared the unknown power that seemed to surround her. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she was cursed. Others believed she carried a malevolent spirit within her. Mothers warned their sons to stay away, and fathers forbade their daughters from befriending her. Aminatu herself did little to dispel these rumors. She rarely spoke of her past and avoided questions about her personal life altogether. When pressed, she would simply reply with a quiet, haunting phrase, "It's better if you don't know." Her words only fueled the gossip. People began to speculate wildly. Was she a witch? Had she made a pact with dark spirits? Or was her beauty itself a trap, luring men to their doom? No one dared approach her directly, except for the bravest, or the most foolish. One day, a young doctor named Ibrahim arrived in the village. He was new to the area, having recently completed his studies in the city and returned to serve rural communities. Ibrahim was unlike anyone the villagers had met before. Educated, confident, and deeply compassionate, he didn't believe in superstitions or curses. To him, every problem had a logical explanation, and every person deserved understanding. At a local celebration, Ibrahim first saw Aminatu. She stood apart from the crowd, her presence both radiant and distant, like a star too bright to touch. Intrigued by her aura of mystery, he approached her. "I want to get to know you," he said warmly, his voice steady and sincere. "Your mystery intrigues me." Aminatu looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed as though she might smile, but instead, she shook her head. "Don't waste your time," she replied coldly. "You'll regret it." But Ibrahim wasn't easily discouraged. There was something about Aminatu, a sadness in her eyes, a vulnerability hidden beneath her guarded exterior, that drew him in. He couldn't explain it, but he felt certain that there was more to her story than the villagers' tales suggested. Over the following weeks, Ibrahim made subtle attempts to win her trust. He greeted her warmly whenever their paths crossed, offered help when he saw her struggling with heavy baskets of grain, and even brought her books from the city, knowing she enjoyed reading. Slowly but surely, Aminatu began to lower her defenses. Still, the villagers watched with bated breath, waiting for the inevitable heartbreak. They were sure that Ibrahim, like all the others, would soon fall victim to whatever curse followed Aminatu. After several months of patient courting, Ibrahim finally earned Aminatu's trust. One evening, as the sky blazed with stars and the air carried the faint scent of blooming desert flowers, they found themselves walking together along the edge of the village. The silence between them was comfortable, yet heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Aminatu broke the silence. Her voice trembled as she began to speak, each word weighted with pain and regret. "I was born with a curse," she confessed, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "When I was 10 years old, my mother took me to a local witch. We were poor, and she feared I would grow up lonely, unwanted. The witch performed a ritual to make me desirable, to ensure that every man who saw me would fall in love with me. But the price was horrifying." She paused, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back, determined to finish. "Every man who falls in love with me is doomed to die. Not immediately, but eventually. I've seen it happen again and again." My first lover drowned in a river during a sudden flood. The second succumbed to a mysterious illness no healer could cure. The third died in a car accident on a road he'd traveled countless times before. They all loved me sincerely, and they all left forever. Her voice cracked on the last sentence, and she turned away, unable to meet Ibrahim's eyes. Ibrahim felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted. His mind raced, trying to process what he had just heard. It sounded impossible, irrational, but deep down, he knew she wasn't lying. "You should have told me earlier," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "I tried," she replied, tears streaming freely down her face now. "But you wouldn't listen. You kept coming back, no matter how many times I pushed you away. I didn't want to hurt you, Ibrahim. Please, leave while you still can." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The night seemed heavier, the stars dimmer, as if the universe itself mourned the weight of her confession. Despite Aminatu's desperate warnings, Ibrahim refused to abandon her. He couldn't simply walk away from the love he felt, a love that had grown stronger with every passing day. Though her confession terrified him, it also deepened his resolve. "I'll find a way to break this curse," he declared, his voice unwavering. "I won't let fear dictate our future." Aminatu wanted to believe him, but years of heartbreak and loss had left her cynical. She had seen too many men promise to save her, only to vanish or perish in the end. Still, there was something different about Ibrahim, his determination, his refusal to give up, his belief that even the darkest shadows could be chased away by light. Ibrahim threw himself into research with relentless energy. He scoured ancient books and manuscripts, consulting healers, mystics, and elders who claimed to understand the supernatural. Many dismissed his inquiries as foolishness, warning him not to meddle with forces beyond human comprehension. But Ibrahim persisted, driven by love and an unshakable faith that answers existed somewhere. After weeks of tireless searching, he stumbled upon an obscure text hidden in the dusty archives of a forgotten library. The book was written in a language few could decipher, but Ibrahim painstakingly translated its cryptic passages. Finally, he found what he was looking for: instructions on how to lift a curse tied to witchcraft. According to the text, the only person capable of breaking such a spell was the original caster, the witch who had performed the ritual. "You must find the witch who cast the spell," Ibrahim explained to Aminatu one evening, his eyes alight with cautious hope. "Only she can free you." Aminatu's heart sank. She knew exactly who the witch was, a reclusive figure who lived deep in the desert, far from civilization. The journey would be perilous, fraught with dangers ranging from treacherous terrain to hostile wildlife. And even if they reached her, there was no guarantee the witch would help them. But Aminatu had no choice. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to entertain the possibility of freedom, not just for herself, but for Ibrahim, whose unwavering devotion had reignited a flicker of hope within her. "We'll leave at dawn," she said softly, her voice tinged with both fear and determination. The journey to the witch's lair was grueling. Aminatu and Ibrahim traversed endless stretches of scorching sand, battled biting winds, and endured sleepless nights under a merciless sun. By the time they arrived, they were physically and emotionally drained. The witch's dwelling was a decrepit hut surrounded by barren earth and twisted trees. Smoke curled lazily from a small fire outside, and the air carried the faint scent of herbs and incense. As they approached, the door creaked open, revealing an old woman with cloudy eyes and a raspy voice. Her presence was both eerie and commanding, as if she carried the weight of centuries in her frail frame. "You've come to ask for freedom?" the witch croaked, her gaze piercing through Aminatu like a blade. "Yes," Aminatu replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I can't keep hurting those I love." The witch studied her for a moment, then smirked, a slow, chilling smile that sent shivers down Ibrahim's spine. "Do you think I cast this curse? That's a lie." Aminatu froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Your mother was deceived," the witch continued, her tone almost mocking. "The curse doesn't exist. You are the one killing those you love." "What do you mean?" Aminatu whispered, her voice barely audible. The witch leaned closer, her cloudy eyes boring into Aminatu's soul. "You possess the rare gift, the power over the fates of others. Unconsciously, you take their lives because you're afraid of losing them. This isn't a curse, it's your own darkness. Your fear, your pain, your inability to trust, these are the true killers. Every man who has loved you has died because you willed it, though you may not have realized it." Aminatu staggered back, her legs giving way beneath her. She collapsed to her knees, her world crumbling around her. Memories flooded her mind. Her mother's desperation, the witch's ritual, the deaths of her lovers. She saw now how her own fears had shaped her reality, how her subconscious need to protect herself had manifested in tragedy after tragedy. She murmured, clutching her head as tears streamed down her face. "It can't be true." Ibrahim knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Aminatu," he said softly, his voice filled with compassion. "This doesn't define you. You didn't know. We can work through this together." But Aminatu shook her head, her heart heavy with guilt and shame. She realized that all her life, she had blamed external forces for her suffering, never confronting the darkness within herself. Upon returning to the village, Aminatu made a solemn vow to herself. She would never allow herself to love again. The weight of the truth, the realization that her own fears and subconscious desires had caused so much suffering, was too heavy to bear. She couldn't risk inflicting pain on anyone else, especially not Ibrahim, whose unwavering belief in her had been both a gift and a burden. Ibrahim, however, refused to give up on her. He visited her often, pleading with her to reconsider. "You can learn to control your emotions," he urged, his voice filled with hope. "We can face this together. You're stronger than your past." But Aminatu's resolve was unshakable. She looked at him with tear-filled eyes, her heart breaking with every word she spoke. "I can't risk your life," she said softly but firmly. "You've already given me more than I deserve. Goodbye, Ibrahim." Though it pained him to leave, Ibrahim eventually accepted her decision. He knew that forcing her to stay would only cause her more anguish. Before departing, he left her a small notebook, a gift he had brought from the city during their journey to find the witch. Inside, he had written a single sentence on the first page: "Even in darkness, there is light." Aminatu watched him go, her heart aching with gratitude and sorrow. Though Ibrahim was no longer by her side, his love remained etched in her soul, a reminder that she was capable of being loved, even if she could never fully accept it. In the years that followed, Aminatu dedicated her life to helping others. She began using her gift, not as a curse, but as a tool for good. When someone in the village fell ill or faced misfortune, she would offer comfort and guidance, drawing on her deep understanding of human emotions and fate. Her presence became a source of solace rather than fear, and slowly, the villagers' distrust turned into respect. Yet, despite her efforts to make amends, Aminatu couldn't escape the lingering guilt that haunted her. She often found herself sitting alone at the edge of the village, watching the sun dip below the horizon in a blaze of fiery colors. In those quiet moments, she would reflect on her life and wonder, is redemption possible for someone like me? Can I ever truly forgive myself for the lives I've taken, even if I didn't mean to? The answer eluded her, but she clung to the belief that perhaps, over time, her actions could outweigh her mistakes. And though the scars of her past would always remain, she hoped that one day, they might fade enough to let the light in.